But, yeah, so people are saying the U.S., that Iraq, a lot of people are feeling bad about Iraq, but we need to go much further than that. We don't just want to reverse, some of these policies in Iraq or get Congress to tap on Bush's shoulder and say, are you sure the Patriot Act is still necessary? We need to abolish the imperial executive. It existed long before Bush. If there's ever been proof that there's no good that can come from it, it's Bush. And, thanks. But, we don't want to go back to the good old days of conscription and, terror bombing. And the nationalists and internationalists, they'll always have shifting excuses. They'll shift as the times change. But when it comes to the politics beyond the water's edge, they're all wet. Because, they'll say, we need to protect Americans. It endangers Americans. We need to rid of weapons of mass destruction that don't exist. We need to liberate Iraqis by giving them Sharia law, civil war, and a Soviet-style constitution. Even the ones that say we need to protect Israel doesn't do very good when you empower their biggest enemies. The truth is no nation should have this imperial reach, this nuclear stockpile. They talk about Iran, but of course the U.S. has tens of thousands of weapons. Even a mistake could be a huge disaster. And they'll always have different reasons, but if we want this country to get its liberty, we need to go much further. And I sense there's a realignment, and this is what we need. There are leftists who are pretty good on this stuff and are starting to think maybe government's kind of dangerous. And there are right-wingers who are thinking, yeah, maybe government's dangerous. That it's actually happening on the right too. But there are people on the left who are pro-torture and pro-slavery. There are people on the right who are pro-democratic revolution and central planning. There are so-called libertarians who are pro-war and dropping bombs on civilians. But what's any of this mean? It means the spectrum is flawed. It's time to rethink left and right once and for all. What's it mean to be a pro-war libertarian? Pro-slavery liberal, pro-democrat? It doesn't mean anything. Sometimes labels are useful, but they also have their limits. So, I favor peace and liberty, and I know all of you support peace and liberty, and we need to do all we can so the next aggressive war, the next power grab, the next president who tries to use emergency as an excuse to strip away ancient liberties and replace them with ancient evils, whether he be a Republican or she be a Democrat, whether the propaganda wears the cape of heroic humanitarianism or the cloak of national security. We need to stick together and oppose the march toward human tragedy and point the way toward a brighter, freer, and more peaceful tomorrow. Thanks.
There are a bunch more of you out of Berkeley anywhere?
I have well over a dozen personal friends who they're not as politically involved, but they agree with these ideas, and that's in Berkeley, and I think it's very important. I've met leftists in Berkeley who say what Robert Scheer said, and it could change, which is why we need to make the argument now. They say maybe we shouldn't have a federal government, and that's not a bad first step, And they say maybe we shouldn't have this empire. And I think a lot of libertarians, they haven't been very good with the left, which of course Berkeley, that's what people think of when they think left. There are a million kinds of leftists in Berkeley. You should see the arguments over Ralph Nader, the capitalist pig, versus George Bush, the communist. It was just weird left in Berkeley. But a lot of leftists, they either go two ways, I think, in life. They either realize at some point business is what makes, property is important, business is important, markets are important, and they either become cynical about it and say, well, I'm just going to become a corporatist, imperialist, and conflate everything they oppose. They used to oppose imperialism and capitalism, and so they come to embrace both, the way the neocons are. And a former leftist who becomes pro-war is like the worst thing in the world. But a former leftist that retains his radicalism and anti-authoritarianism, but understands markets and spontaneous order and individual rights, it's about the best libertarian that can exist. So we need to understand these arguments. Just because someone agrees with us that the that they want the income tax lower doesn't necessarily mean they're the best recruit. I'm not saying we should stop talking to anybody, but Yeah, some of these people, they were very libertarian before I met them. And Berkeley's got a horrible government, but there's some libertarian spirit there. They're one of the, our congresswoman, for all her problems, was the only one who voted against the initial authorization of force. And and she has a lot of bad positions, of course, but there's a sense of decentralist leftism, and you explain economics well enough to a leftist, and sometimes they'll get it.
Good morning. Great speech, by the way.
Thanks.
On your topic about the changing dynamics, excuse me, I stepped out for a bit, so I don't know if you actually discussed it, but as mentioned before by speaker, I'm speaking about Iran, the dynamics dealing with Iran. We know about the Mossadegh overthrow. I didn't even realize the Russians overthrew a democratically elected government in the 1920s either. Are you familiar with any of the dynamics concerning Iran after the Shah, or?
You mean with American opinion?
Well, not necessarily so, but I mean policy, such as...
Well, my understanding, I'm not the biggest expert on this, the CIA helped install the Shah, and eventually, he was overthrown, the Ayatollah took over, and all of a sudden they were the pure evil. They were pure evil. Of course, it didn't stop Reagan from hooking them up with some weapons. But, all of these, the U.S. will support, if the U.S. supports the Khmer Rouge, which is per capita perhaps the most brutal communist regime in world history, one of the most evil regimes, killed anyone with glasses, killed anyone who, or tried to, kill people who understood English or were Christian, or, one of the just pure evil regime. And if Carter and Reagan are going to support them to make some point with China, goading the Chinese on to help the Khmer Rouge, so the biggest communist regime and the most evil communist regime against this what kind of anti-communist war is that? So all of these, I don't know exactly what people were saying, and I don't know exactly what the U.S. did after in Iran, but I'm sure it wasn't good.
I was going to say, you covered an awful lot of subjects, so, you did a great job.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Anthony, I just wanted to remind you that when you started off your little speech today, you described yourself as the rookie. I would like to elevate that to Rookie of the Year. Yeah. Great speech. And I had some questions, but you answered them all, so thanks a lot.
Thank you so